What's quite amazing is I don't think people realize that this is a career path, because if I look at some work I've done with McKinsey and with Deloitte and Accenture and companies like that, they have departments who create their presentations, because you can't spend $1 million on a project and then your results come out with different fonts, different colors. They
Right.
bring in the pros to make sure that because it's not just the content, it's the delivery and the visualization of that content. Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. To join me is Emily Schneider, who is a PowerPoint design expert and presentation expert. And we're going to talk about one of the business tools that is sort of a unloved cousin almost by lots of people. And everyone has to do it at some stage. And any of you who've had to create a presentation to try and put your story across will know how difficult it is to actually put together a great presentation. So we have a specialist with us today who's going to take us through her process, her background, and how do we create compelling storytelling in our presentations. So Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. It's awesome to be here.
So you specialize in creating presentations. When you were a little child, did you think that your career was going to be on PowerPoint and writing stories for a living?
No, I think PowerPoint was just invented, to be honest. I don't think it's much. It's right? No, there were computers were barely around when I was born. So I guess PowerPoint wasn't even invented. But when I started getting interested or thinking about the future, no, PowerPoint was never part of it. But what I knew or what I always loved was I was always a creative. I always had a way to express myself. I always saw the world a little different and definitely in shapes and colors. That's how I resonated. It's how my energies were created. Now I can bring words to it. I didn't know what it meant then, but that's how I saw things. I would see things, I would break things. So I would see how things came together. I would see how parts intertwined. I would see how the puzzles all work. And I was imaginative and I just had visions and I wanted to move things or create reference and then figure out how to make that feel good. And so I just kind of followed those same intentions with my professional career, tapped into the things that brought me joy that I love doing. And when I got curious about it, I realized it was helping people build their presentations, tell stories better, connect, create stronger, authentic, trusted connections that we can then move things forward in business and life in the world. And so I just, like I said, tapped into the joy and the fun that I had as a kid that now I can see how the journey brought me here. But no, there was no PowerPoint. Nobody talked about it. We didn't even have a computer when I was born, right? I was elementary school age when that first came home.
We've all heard about death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And I'm sure when we think about, oh God, another PowerPoint, we've all experienced trash presentations. So your role, I guess, is to make not trash presentations and to make stories or the points that we're trying to pull across as engaging as possible. When we talk about presentations, what kind of presentations do you do? Is this TED Talks? Is this an internal HR meeting? What kind of spread of work do you do?
Yeah, really, it could be all of that and everything in between. It can be from a simple one-page communication tool that's needed, right, for an internal conversation to a big presentation, keynote, TED Talk. I have not reached that platform yet, but that's a good one to put on my vision board for sure. I help from internal, external communication, sales decks, pitch decks, investment decks, quarterly updates, even just presenting to your clientele and getting them on board where's businesses, how things are changing. From a financial standpoint, I work in the different industries. So financial, life sciences, a lot of corporations that have decisions that are continually being made, products and projects going on where many people are part of that system. And so how do you make everybody align to where things are, drive informed, impactful decision? And when you can add a level of visual storytelling to that, you really elevate that conversation and drive it in the direction that you are looking for as that business leader.
So you brought up the term unpacking. Messaging is tough. You've got a whole bunch of different target markets. You've got, when you have a client coming to you who says, this is my goal, I need to get everyone to rally around a specific point. what is your starting process with a client? Because this is the complicated part of it, is they might have a vision, but they might say, for example, make me a PowerPoint or make me a presentation for XYZ. And if the client doesn't know what's going on, it's going to be very difficult for you to create something compelling. How do you work with clients to create a compelling presentation? What is the process that you follow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually don't help. I come in once a content or that presentation, that topic has already been baked and established. So I am not writing the content. I refine it. I help them articulate what it is. So clients can come to me with white paper, with an outline. They can have a very subtle, simple PowerPoint, or they could have one that's like a compilation of a bunch of old work that they've done together or a bunch of random thoughts that come in. And so I will help them refine that. I have a process and a system, but it starts with understanding who their audience is and how this delivery will be said so that we can align on the type of story that needs to be told. Quarterly updates, investment meetings, those need different type of information for those people, for that audience, for that room who they're talking to, than a keynote presentation does at a big event. What's that general takeaway? And then we refine the story. We always start with the beginning or with the end and at the beginning, and then we build that sequence. And then we focus on design and really articulating through simplicity and consistency how their key message needs to drive forward from a totality standpoint to an individual slide aspect. And once we've gone through those three steps, usually delivery becomes a little bit more seamless and easy. People have more confidence. They already feel more credible and knowledgeable in their content. They've taken time to prep it and to think about it. And it allows them to engage and boost that audience engagement so that in the end, those conversations, that decision, that impact is really clear and it's easy for their audience to walk away with the right information or the right choices.
So, as a specialist communicator, you obviously have some tips and tricks, or you have some tools in your toolbox to help with the storytelling. So, we all know about Hitchcock. There are all sorts of different storytelling styles. I spoke to somebody recently, and there are 12 different archetypal storytelling styles. What kind of storytelling uh, have you found works best for your customers? I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, it's going to differ between finance and so on,
Yeah.
but do you bring in storytelling techniques in terms of the kind of language used or the kind of imagery you use? Or is it really just based on the client and very technical?
Yeah, it's probably more based on the client. I love that question. It makes me really curious because I don't know the exact answer. I definitely, again, I am not the words person. My goal is to eliminate words. To your point, death by PowerPoint is over communication in PowerPoint. It's when there is just all these words and I don't actually need anybody to present to me that can just read the slide and move on, right? It becomes more that kind of reading storybook. So I pull back on the words to find, the very limited, short way to articulate something within a powerful visual. That can be from image styles, consistency, right? What kind of emotion, what kind of feeling, what is the subject matter that will drive? What is the brand itself that we're talking about, right? That will drive that direction. But it also means what data looks like, how information is highlighted, how keywords are articulated, where headlines are placed. So I am from the visual standpoint of what that story drives than a more traditional storytelling approach, I would think.
Okay, well, I'll share that episode with you and you can have a listen. It's
Yes, I would love
fantastic.
it. Please.
Yeah. Now, I've done a lot of presentations myself and quite a lot in the sort of McKinsey style. And those are really boring, but there are some very good aspects to it in terms of just stripping down a page to its absolute minimum and allowing people to focus on the content. So I've done quite a lot of sort of learning on developing presentations and making sure that I reduce enormous amounts of content into really its just most simplest form. And the worst thing that a audience member can have, or that a speaker can have, is that people are reading ahead on your slides and trying to read the 50 words or the paragraph on your page. Is that kind of the kind of thing that you do?
Yes. So that comes down to like some of my design principles once in that process that talked about earlier. So when you talk about visual storytelling and visual design in a presentation, It's about slide intention. It's about being cognizant and intentional with your text, and also that balance with visuals as well. You need to make sure each slide is simple. Less is more. You want to emphasize 2 or 3 main things. I'm talking like ideally 30 words per page, right? You don't want to give your story away in your slides. Your slides should be the secondary, the background to what your voiceover is. My example of, or the way I can explain that really well is I have a 5-year-old daughter. She cannot read, but she loves books because when she looks at a story, she can follow along, she can feel something, she can understand what is being told just by pictures. And that power transcends, especially in a business world, when you add the power of your visuals to your voice, to your story, to your facts, you are now engaging somebody in such a better way. There's also this really amazing data fact that we retain 65% of information when it's visually designed versus only 10 to 20% when it's copy. So yes, when there's copy on a slide, you read it and your mind wanders off. We're always creating stories, but with visual storytelling as part of presentations, you allow your audience to stay engaged, or they're wondering to be relevant to where you want them to be because of what you have on your slides.
So what I think we should actually do is we need to do a separate call, and we need to do a sped up version of you taking a trash presentation and making
Ah,
it a beautiful presentation. What interesting stories can you tell me when in this PowerPoint space that you've come across? Weird deadlines, weird things that you've got to tell, or big impact that a presentation of yours has actually achieved?
yeah. So that goes like in 2 very different directions. I'll start with like the success metrics. So actually I measure success based on how my clients feel their presentation went. I am working to gather more like in like financial data, like, okay, if you had an investor deck and I helped you before you were making this is the kind of buy-in or how your sales were going. And now where are you? That's a little bit harder for me to capture. But I will say based on just this year alone, I've had handfuls of clients who have said that the presentation not only allowed them to have the right conversation, but it was more about the conversations that came around after that really led that. And it wasn't about the slide design or how well it was. It was about the specific key takeaways that they wanted them to talk, right? I use the term that they were able to be the conversation conductor, like an orchestra. They laid all the beats, they put all the tunes out, and they allowed their audience to really listen in and follow. So the end conversation where it was exactly what they were looking for. And those investors and those people really saw their brand as credible and trusted, and that their business was moving forward. And that's exactly what that update was. I also know on the flip side, I know a story about a company who says they lost a $30 million project because their deck was not designed by a professional, and they didn't have it set up to lead the conversation. They just became like somebody else, or it was easily forgotten about. So that investment missed for them the opportunity to have this project. Now they get it. They're coming back. They want that. They're willing to invest, a little compared to that $30 million deal. So I think the potential is limitless when you take the time, whether you hire a professional like me or you use some of the tools and tips that we've been talking about and you use some applied theory to build your story. And for me, it's about taking the time and being simple and consistent to really drive your story forward. The wildest request I ever had was a quick turn project in like 24 hours. It was a huge deck, and it was a bunch of scientists, and they had been studying moths. They needed to shift something they had put together that was a ton of words, and we couldn't really edit any, but they needed it just to sing so that, again, it stood out. I think they were entering some kind of competition or some kind of awards, something within their industry. But I worked with data scientists, but not like those kind of research scientists and their specifics and their need. And just that the topic matter was about moths and some kind of light pollution and pollination. And it was very interesting. That was a really quick, interesting, high energy, high excitement project that came. And I learned a lot from that one for sure in multiple ways.
I guess one of the benefits of working with somebody like you in terms of creating multiple presentations is that the learning curve is quite steep. So you understand that business and you understand the communication style relatively quickly. So the second time, third time a presentation comes in, it's much quicker. I think
Yes.
people forget that any first meeting, any first engagement, there's both sides are thinking, "Ooh, have I got it right? Have I put in enough detail, enough attention, etc." After the second one, you already know the communication style, what works and what doesn't work. It's an iterative and a continuous process. People who do one presentation with you go on to a couple more and perhaps into different departments in the business, because having somebody who understands the tone of voice and the way that a business presents itself is a great asset.
Yeah. And I think it shines in how they present themselves or how that information and that update or that business progress comes to life and again, when you're talking to people and they get it, they're like, wait, they start to ask, what did you do different? Why? And again, I think it's also interesting that like a well-designed presentation isn't always noticed. A poor one is. So they're used to a style and then
Yes.
something comes in different. They're like, oh, this worked well, or now I'm engaging. And again, I think it's like we all love to share the good things that we have. And I think we're better when we do that. One of the things I love about my job is when I get in my zone of genius, which is presentation design, and I shine bright. What am I doing? I'm actually helping somebody else do the same thing in their world. And so to pay that forward in that way is so great. So usually when they're feeling good, you're always happy to share, like, actually, I had a little help, or like I used an expert who was able to help and guide me, right? Again, it's a partnership, it's a collaboration. I'm never going to be the subject expert, but I'm an expert in how to take information and simplify it to communicate properly and more strategically.
What's quite amazing is I don't think people realize that this is a career path, because if I look at some work I've done with McKinsey and with Deloitte and Accenture and companies like that, they have departments who create their presentations, because you can't spend $1 million on a project and then your results come out with different fonts, different colors. They
Right.
bring in the pros to make sure that because it's not just the content, it's the delivery and the visualization of that content. So it's something that is very often overlooked. But the reason these big companies look so professional is because they have people behind the scenes who know how to visualize and present stories. So it's a very interesting career choice that a lot of people don't know is out there.
Totally. And I would say even like, and then there's also companies who don't value it or they tuck it in under design and just like marketing. And it's a different mindset. It's a different approach and it's a different system and tools. Usually creatives are always a little bit like PowerPoint's a bad word. Presentations are not something they want to design.
Yeah.
But here I am geeking out about it 20 years after being in the industry. And I love it.
Well, like you said, it's such an important part of a business selling process. And one of the worst things in the world is seeing spelling errors and different logos, or logos moving on the presentation by millimeters. I mean, those are the little things that a lot of people do nitpick, and that could be something that loses you a $30 million project.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm. So what I would like to suggest is we should have a second session where we are going to take a screen capture of just one page,
Sure.
and we'll add it onto the show, because that'd be really good just to show how you take an example of a rickety presentation, and just with some small tweaks by a professional, make it look easy and turn
Yeah.
it into something that is visually appealing. So I think that's what we should do. It'll give
That
more
sounds
value to the listeners and the viewers.
that sounds super fun.
Cool. Well, Emily, thank you so much for your time. Now, I do have a website for you. It's IamEmilySchneider.com. I'm going to put that into the description. And you've got some really cool examples of your work. You've also got a couple of questions like the planning stage. How long does it take? What do you need to get started? What are revisions, and why you can't have 500 of them? And yeah, a lot more information about you and the whole process of creating presentations. So, Emily, thank you so much.
You too. Thanks so much, Nicholas.
I really do appreciate your comments. So why not go and watch this live on YouTube, or go to my website, kuhne.no. That's KUHNE.no for more information.